I'm so glad to finally be talking about ADHD on the podcast. I think it's a really important topic. I think that it's very relevant to our world and to many of our listeners and those of you in this community. I believe a lot of us have neurodivergent brains and have either had a diagnosis in the past or really resonate with the picture and struggles of neurodivergence and are seeking support or a diagnosis or are looking to learn more about how their brains may be different. And I think it's so important to understand those subtle differences between our brains and how many of us do not function quote unquote normally. And there really is no such thing as normal. But when you learn, let's say, the quirks and the workarounds and the genius coping mechanisms of a brain that is a bit different, you can really start to see and embrace the genius and live in a bit more harmony with your life, knowing some of your shortcomings and some of the ways you may need to just get around your brain's tendencies to get lost or caught up in certain things or have these highs and lows that make functioning in everyday tasks a little bit difficult. So today we're chatting with Dr. Laura Gouge. She is a naturopathic physician. She actually specializes in MCAS and histamine issues, which I know is a very popular topic on this show. So check out her Instagram for a lot more information on that. But she supports a lot of patients with ADHD and neurodivergence, and it's a passion of hers. And she was diagnosed with it in her adult life, and it made a lot of things make sense for her. Why monotonous tasks felt so painful, but when she had 17,000 things on her to-do list and she was almost overwhelmed by complex tasks, all of a sudden her brain was happy. And it just kind of gave her a lot of validation and permission as to why it felt like she was walking around in the world feeling different from those around her. And the more I listened to her talk and had this beautiful conversation with her, the more I began to understand a lot more about my own brain. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was like 14, when I first started seeing a psychiatrist, and tried different medications for it, the Vyvanse, the Adderall, all the things. And while they would temporarily help, I found that the come down and the negative side of the pharmaceuticals just wasn't worth the immense benefits that I did receive from them. I just couldn't really handle the come downs in the way that my mood would change, because already ADHD affects my mood enough. So I've been learning how to manage my brain naturally over the years and how to find systems that work for me in my life and how to stay organized in a mind that almost prefers chaos, because in many ways it's more fun for our brains to solve a problem. We are people who need a little bit more friction and chaos in order to be interested in a task, which is a major thing we're going to talk about today. And so ever since this conversation, I've been trying to become more aware of some of the systems I've created to help myself function. I shared a bunch of those on my Instagram at organic_Olivia and my ADHD highlight to kind of give you guys an insight into how I've been managing things in my life kind of naturally and finding these workarounds. And today we're going to kind of talk about all the juice on ADHD and how it's not necessarily what we think it is. It's not this defect in our brains or even this outright deficit of attention necessarily. It's actually what Laura calls this concept of an interest-based nervous system. So instead of it being a lack of focus, there's actually this juxtaposition between, yes, an inability to focus on certain things that don't create enough interest or friction in our brains, but also this ability to hyper-focus on things that heavily interest us. And we have this ability to get lost in and go down rabbit holes and completely be obsessed with and master certain things that our nervous systems are lit up by. And in many ways, that can be a bit of a gift. But obviously, yes, it can cause us to get lost when it comes to trying to focus on the daily things or the more monotonous, habitual tasks that we need to do every day to keep our life in order. And so understanding that and knowing that it's not a problem with your brain, it's actually just this way that your nervous system needs a little bit more juice and interest to get going is a really cool way to reframe it and to be aware of your own actions. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about dopamine levels and how to create a bit more balance within our dopamine so that we can live fuller lives with less extremes. And we're going to chat about just having this awareness around our own behavior. So for example, we have these nervous systems that oscillate between periods of high cortisol, where we're hyper productive, we're running on stress hormones to get things done, we're in the zone, we're temporarily really feeling good off of that adrenaline, checking things off our to-do list, really interested, right? And then we go through these periods of low cortisol dips after we overextend ourselves and do way too much and take way too much on because it temporarily feels good and exciting. And it's so important to understand this and be mindful of this so that we don't judge ourselves for trying to kind of work within this system in order to function, because it's what we've done all of our lives. So it helps us to, for example, judge ourselves less when it comes to our tendency to create chaos in our lives, because that revs us up and at least gets us going in the morning. It helps us create less judgment around, for example, waiting until the last minute to do something, or letting our houses get super messy so that it can be more of a complex project to tackle that might engage our brains more rather than a monotonous cleaning task. It's really all about having this understanding and compassion for how the ADHD brain and nervous system works, and then going into solutions of, okay, how do we live within this beautiful brain, harness the gifts of this brain, understand our quirks, the way that we see time differently, the way that that might affect our friendships and our job and our deadlines and all the things, but really use the excellent parts of this neurodivergent brain picture to our advantage, and understand even evolutionarily where that would have played a role. We would have been really good hunter-gatherers if we were obsessed with picking berries one day, and it would have served our communities. So just knowing that our brains serve a purpose and there's nothing wrong with us. And it's a really cool conversation and has a lot of tangible tips and takeaways. So let's get into it. My fellow ADHD and neurodivergent folks, you are going to be seen and heard and validated. And Laura is so lovely. And it was just such an honor to learn from her. So I'm really excited to share it with you guys. And I hope that you get a ton of value from it and feel like you are being deeply witnessed, because I sure did. Enjoy. Okay. Are you ready?
We feel each other's emotions.
It's everything. It's living my life intentionally.
That's the message, right?
Absolutely. There's no difference between our mental health and our physical health. It's the same exact thing.
And without further ado, let's get... Hi, Dr. Laura Gouge. Welcome to the show.
It's so great to be here. Thanks, Olivia.
I cannot wait to talk about ADHD with you today. As two ADHD girlies.
Right?
It is a huge life obstacle, and at the same time, an immense gift that I have finally started to appreciate. And we're going to talk a lot about that today and help to explain to people why their brains have this superpower, and also these things that we might need to just like work around or have some hacks for so that we can live happier lives. So if you can start out with kind of what is ADHD, ADHD symptoms, and the experience in someone's body and life so people can get a feel for it.
ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition. And so it's globally thought to affect about 7% of people. And it affects our brain, and it's thought to be neurodiverse. So our brain is functioning in some way differently than the typical experience of being alive, and how your brain sees things, interprets things, and processes information. And so with ADHD, it affects our attention. So how we focus, how we are able to take in information, how long we're able to focus on something, even getting things done. Like one of the biggest symptoms of ADHD is procrastination or not finishing tasks, right? The ADHD person is someone who classically will have dozens and dozens of projects started around their house where they have maybe finished them 70, 80, 90%, but not getting to 100. It affects our activity. So hyperactive or impulsive type ADHD is very common. And this is probably the classic stereotypical presentation is the child who is hyperactive, they can't sit still, they're loud, they're disruptive, they're getting in trouble in class, and they are not able to regulate that activity despite there maybe being negative consequences. So there can be impulsivity, where that could show up in, like in children, where it's speaking out of turn or getting up in class when they're supposed to be seated. In adults, sometimes that looks like maybe acting without thinking things through, making really big or impulsive life decisions. So it can show up a lot of different ways. There can be a lot of different flavors of ADHD. but that's the gist of it.
Many people aren't outright diagnosed with ADHD, and there's some like diagnosis hurdles. Some people don't seek a diagnosis. A lot of practitioners aren't necessarily properly assessing people because we're still learning so much about it. So when you threw out that number of 7%, I'm like, is that real? Because I feel like everyone that is my next of kin is kind of dealing with it.
Well, there's definitely a question of, is it being overdiagnosed? Is it being underdiagnosed? And the question is, how are these symptoms impairing our level of functioning? Because as I listed off those symptoms, people listening, it's part of the human experience. Everybody's impulsive sometimes. Everyone's restless sometimes.
Yeah.
Everyone can have trouble focusing. But is it causing a problem in your life? Like that, we look at that, we gauge the severity. And for a diagnosis of ADHD to be made, we have to see symptoms before age 12. We don't have to be diagnosed. It's actually very common. I know I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my 30s, but we have to have evidence that symptoms were present from a young age, so before age 12.
What might those symptoms look like before age 12 versus as a woman in her 30s?
So, I mean, for me, the symptoms were probably pretty similar. I think they were just missed. So a lot of times especially in young women, what we tend to see is more of that inattentive presentation of ADHD. And so in young women, it's often this kind of quiet difficulty focusing. I know for me, I thought I had learning differences. I couldn't say what it was. I just knew I couldn't really pay attention in school, but I could do the test. Right? I could do the test.
Oh, because the test was pressure.
It was pressure.
Ooh, I love
it was
the
a
test.
game. It was
SATs. Get at me.
I could cram, right? So I could show up for that test. So I just silently internalized this belief that I, had learning differences. I could do my tests. There was certainly an impact on my self-esteem of thinking I was probably less smart than my peers. And for a lot of women, it will manifest as depression and anxiety, especially anxiety. And so for so many women, they are misdiagnosed and treated for anxiety and depression, when in fact, later on, we'll learn it's ADHD. And in boys at a young age, it can really show up in both men and women.
Yeah.
But in boys, it's more often seen and diagnosed. Boys are diagnosed twice as often as females, even though it's thought to affect both genders equally.
Is it because they're that like classic?
That more classic. You can't miss it in the classroom.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so my husband also has ADHD and he's trialed medication for a while, which we'll talk about medication. It would I would see how much it would help him function, but at the same time, it also like would make him lose parts of himself, like that hyperactivity that made his personality a certain way. And there was just more downsides for him than upsides. It kind of like numbed him a bit. But I see his presentation more so at like, there'll be times that we're in the house and he's like screaming, making Donnie Wild Thornberry noises, like just on a daily basis, just for funsies, because that's just his like hyperactive personality. Whereas for me, my ADHD is like overstimulation. Don't touch me right now. The house has been a mess for 3 weeks and now I'm going to organize everything to a T and I need to hyperfocus because I haven't been focusing in weeks. Like it's these interesting swings of like dopamine and neurochemicals and all this stuff that comes when you're interested in something, which we'll also talk about. But it's just funny how looking back, I think each person listening, whether they're seeing themselves in this picture or they're seeing their children in this picture, it's interesting how when you look back, all of a sudden the pieces fit. Because you're saying, in my experience when I was younger, I had this inattention in class, but I noticed the cramming was good. I liked the pressure. And for me in school, I could make myself pay attention, but I had other signs that I just wish someone saw as neurodivergence. Like my handwriting was so messy. And teachers would tell me I was lazy because of my handwriting. They would get me in trouble, call my parents. And I'm like, look, guys, when I sit here and try and slow down, I can have beautiful handwriting, but my brain doesn't work like that. And I'm not like, I have to get into a certain mode. And then also with like math class, for example, I was kind of like too fast. I was too good at the math. And so I got bored. And so teachers would come over and be like, okay, now that you did that math, like the addition problem, now write the number in print, write the number in script, draw the number so that like you can just have something else to do that'll interest your brain while everyone else is doing the test. So my brain was almost like over functioning. And I think this is actually what we see in this upside of ADHD is that there's this a little bit of genius in there, However, I can't get to places on time sometimes. So there's ups and downs.
There's definitely ups and downs to ADHD. And I think we can focus so much on the gifts, and we can definitely talk about the positive part, because in part of just being neurodivergent, there are going to be upsides to it. And there can be immense challenges. And so I always want to have a lot of nuance in that conversation, because I think in where anyone with ADHD is on a day-to-day basis, it can feel just infuriating when people talk all about the gifts and not the challenges, but also being, we get to choose how we're going to play the cards that we're dealt in this lifetime. And if we are neurodivergent, how are we going to make our lives work with the brains that we have versus constantly feeling like we're trying to fix ourselves as if we're broken? Because I just feel like that mindset and that way of relating to ourselves is just going to lead to pain and struggle.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's really wonderful that you want to validate people's real lived experiences and challenges. So I want to ask you if you can maybe just name off a few other obstacles, like that time blindness, for example. Sometimes they say it's either now or not now.
Yes.
It's the only time that's on my clock.
100%. So time blindness is a very common trait of ADHD. There's a sense of now and not now. So there's a real difficulty in gauging how much time we're going to need to get something done. That can lead to running late. It can lead to not doing things. Like if we have a project that we need to be working on periodically, just not getting it done until the very last minute. It can look like sometimes leaving way too much time, like feeling so much anxiety that we're not going to be at the airport on time. We show up 3 or 4 hours early, or leaving way too much time and trying to compensate for that feeling of time. There can be a lot of struggles in interpersonal relationships, with everything from running late to being disorganized to maybe having difficulty following through on things that we said we were going to do. There can be difficulty if we are somewhat impulsive. There could be difficulties in communication of just saying what's on our mind that could get us in trouble at work or with friendships. I think a lot of people with ADHD have trouble maintaining friendships because of that sense of, I feel like I just saw a friend 3 years ago yesterday. I feel like we're in touch, but they might feel like I have neglected or let go of this friendship.
No, keep going.
There can sometimes be intensity in friendships where we might come on a little bit strong, because when we're excited and we want something and it feels really good, we can come on maybe a little bit too strong because of that interest-based nervous system and really wanting to hyper-focus on a new relationship or a new friendship. A lot of times, one of the classic sayings of ADHD is that hard things are easy for us and simple things are hard. So those of us with ADHD are often the person you want in a crisis or in a hard situation. But those day-to-day tasks, like doing our dishes and our laundry and keeping our closets organized and tidying up the house and even just making sure things we own have a place, can feel just impossible. And like our lives can feel messy. Yeah. I also just want to acknowledge, I think one of the biggest challenges of ADHD can be a sense of unlived life, because we can have these great ideas, and yet if we are constantly in the now, sometimes it might look like I should have quit my job 10 years ago, or I've been meaning to take this vacation and I just haven't booked it. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes making big changes can feel harder for ADHD. And so it's one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about working with people and supporting people, in that we do have so many wonderful gifts and wonderful qualities, and trying to overcome as many of these obstacles as possible so we can live full lives.
So making those big changes can feel harder even with that impulsivity?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes, because it's this sense of, I'm just going to think about that. I've been thinking about making this big change. I've been thinking about starting a company, or thinking about ending a relationship, or thinking about making a change. But we can mull over things mentally, but not necessarily like always take action, because a lot of times we hold our pro-con lists in our head. So one of the things I will talk to my clients about is get those lists out and put them onto paper, because we can mull over decisions. Not everyone does this. Some people are action takers and they're very quick, but a lot of times we hold our ideas inside. And so it's like we have this little like game of ping pong going back and forth. Like, I'm going to quit. No, I'm not. I'm going to do this. No, I'm not. And then we just don't take action.
That makes a lot of sense. Even on in the fact of like, I'm meaning to send that text, but I'm overthinking. I see that on my husband all the time. I'll be like, make sure you get back to that person. Because I'm so aware of his ADHD and mine, and I've made so much progress in mine, but it's been more difficult for him. And maybe that is a gender difference thing that can happen. Like maybe women are more likely to like research, ask people, try different hacks. But I'll be like, make sure you text that family member back, whatever. Even sometimes his family members will group text us together because they know that like he's just not good at answering.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing he's not texting people back because he doesn't want to text them back. It's because I'll find him in the other room 30 minutes later and he's still writing and erasing the text because he's overthinking it. And it's so fascinating to see how, like you said, it affects our interpersonal relationships. And now I'm very fascinated by mental health conditions and diagnoses. I ended up finishing out my college degree studying psychology, and I hear these terms that you're saying, like impulsivity, like these kind of ruminating, almost like obsessive mulling over thoughts, but not taking action. I hear the interpersonal relationship problems, and I could easily see those overlap with conditions like BPD, OCD, bipolar, depression, anxiety, all of these things. So where is this kind of line where some people may be misdiagnosed with either or when it's actually the opposite?
So misdiagnosis is definitely an issue with ADHD. I think it can be missed as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder. There's so many other things it could show up as. I would say those are probably like 3 of the most common. And it often will depend on how someone is presenting at different points in time. Because like when we were talking about all the ways ADHD can show up, it's not static in our lifetime. We can go through different phases where we might be in a more like hyper aroused state of our nervous system. So we're like getting things done and we're showing up as very productive. And that might be misconstrued as anxiety or even something like bipolar. Or it could be that we're in a very low energy, like I can't get any motivation to get anything done. And it could look like depression. Now, those things can also exist at the same time. And so it's complicated, and it's definitely where it's really helpful to be working with qualified mental health providers to have those evaluations, because there are tools, at least, to explore like what is going on so that we can figure out what would be most helpful as far as a diagnosis. And I think the label of a diagnosis is only helpful in how we use that information to say, well, what am I going to do with this information?
Yeah.
And for many people, it's very validating. I know for me it was. It explained my whole life experience.
Yeah.
But it's really like, what are we going to do with that? Do we want to pursue medication? Will it help us get more specific therapy? Will it help, just in changing how we live our lives?
Yeah. It's so hard to live in those swings, to go from that hyper productive mode and be aware like, oh, I'm back. I'm here. And how long am I going to be here? Mm-hmm. And then I know it's going to end up in a crash and I'm going to have low energy weeks, months. And of course I could see how that could be misdiagnosed as something else. But it's like right now I'm in a hyperproductive swing, but it took like months of me having no dopamine and like having to refill my brain chemicals and be bored for me to all of a sudden get this upswing where I'm interested in life again. And I don't have those extremes as often now in my life because I've been very conscious to kind of make certain things in my life less stimulating and a little bit more level so that I don't swing between the extremes. But just happens. And it's a tough lived experience to wonder, when am I going to be gone again?
One of the things about ADHD is I think a big part of living with it is learning how to master our energy and how to regulate our energy and how to support our nervous systems. Because one of just the beliefs that I have is that most people with ADHD have very sensitive nervous systems. I think most people would probably be classified as highly sensitive people. One of the theories is that if you are this very, very sensitive child, you're going to be much more sensitive to all of the inputs in our environment, from even just like subtle misattunements from our parents, maybe not meeting our needs, and the inputs of like being in the school system, being in the education system. And so I think a big part of it is really learning how to own the sensitive nervous systems that we have so that we can regulate our energy and our attention more and be less prone to like the extreme energy and the getting things done and my house is clean to like it's all falling apart and it's all a mess. So we can find more middle ground.
That makes so much sense. And I guess now that you're saying that, I've connected it to, I've definitely built more capacity in my nervous system and have understood the practices that get me back into like my flow essence core state.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm mindful to do them. I'm mindful to make art a lot more often. I'm mindful to like just really do the things that get me there, sit outside. I use the word dopamine when I was describing my experience. And I'm feeling like I get these dopamine highs and this chasing. And then all of a sudden I like hit a wall and I have to go to that pain side of the pleasure pain scales. And I have to experience that for a while until things refill. Aside from nervous system regulation, which I want to go into more, does dopamine play a role?
Absolutely. The predominant theory of what causes ADHD is that it is a fluctuating level of dopamine. So sometimes it'll just be described as a low dopamine condition, but I feel like it's actually more accurate to say that ADHD is a condition where we have inconsistent levels of dopamine. And so it often takes more for us to have interest in something. And so it's why those simple, boring things around the house can feel almost painful trying to get them done. It's because we just don't have that internal energy for it. But then when we are interested in something, we can be flooded with dopamine and it can feel so good. And we can almost go too far of like oh my gosh, I'm really interested in cleaning out my closet. So I'm going to, people will easily just tell me like, oh, I stayed up till 4 a.m. because I got really into doing this house project. Right?
I know everyone is listening, just nodding their heads like, yes. It's such an interesting experience. And I think a lot about Dr. Anna Lemke's work. And I had her on the podcast and we talked about sort of this dopamine pain pleasure scale. And she talks a lot about this interplay with addiction, which is, I think, so fascinating. And I for sure have seen in myself and, family members, people that I know with ADHD. And it makes sense that it's kind of this, you just get used to your whole life kind of juicing the dopamine when you can, going for more and more pleasure. And when you're not super, super conscious of it, you don't have the education, the words, the framework of like, hey, I know this is feeling really good right now, but I need to go do something boring. I need to go do something a little bit painful and hard so that I can protect my brain from crashing later. Like that's where we're kind of like failing people by not explaining this this tool that we can use and this way that we can be so self-aware of our own behavior. But it really does take the self-awareness.
It definitely does. And I love Dr. Lemke's work. And I think that understanding our dopamine pathways can be very helpful in finding just everyday tools to better regulate our attention and our energy and be less prone to those highs and lows.
Mm-hmm. So with this in mind, and just to reiterate Dr. Anna Lemke's kind of theory and explanation for people, we kind of have this seesaw in our brains that involves dopamine, where anytime we're consistently going towards pleasure and not balancing it with pain, our brains kind of hit a point where you just can't get any more pleasure. It's kind of like when you're eating a box of cookies and you're like 15 cookies deep and you're like, this doesn't even feel good anymore. This doesn't even taste good anymore, but I can't stop because my brain is trying to keep going. You hit that point. The brain can't feel that much euphoria. So all of a sudden the seesaw has to go in the other direction and your brain will give you the experience of pain in order to get things back to baseline. And that very much feels like the experience of ADHD. And I think the reason that that's so difficult for people and why that's in our nature is because of this interest-based nervous system that you said. Because when we find things that we're interested in, it's so hard not to go towards them full throttle. So can you explain a bit more about what this interest-based nervous system framework is and why ADHD is not necessarily attention deficit, but rather this inability to focus when we're not interested and this hyper-focus when we are?
The paradox of ADHD is the interest-based nervous system, because when you hear attention deficit disorder, you think, oh, well, this person just can't focus. But like you said, the reality is we can focus. In fact, at exceptional superhuman levels when we are interested in something. Like if you see a child with ADHD, they could easily struggle with certain types of classwork, but they might be able to sit and do art or build Legos or do imaginary play outside for hours. And so it's this really beautiful paradox that I think can be challenging when we are in chapters of our life when there are things we need to do that don't interest us. And so that is where our conventional education system can be hard. It's where a lot of times people will struggle with their careers. But because with ADHD, there is a tendency and a like natural inclination to go towards what interests us. It's like we have an allergy to boredom. And so for the average neurotypical person, they can go through life with things that interest them and things that are boring and be able to just do stuff with relative ease. I'm not saying there's not challenges, but like relative ease compared to somebody with ADHD, where for those of us with ADHD, the interest-based nervous system can really make us struggle with anything that doesn't interest us. And so one of the tools that I use with my clients is, yes, we have medication as a tool, but that's one tool. And even when I talk to my clients about medication, it's like, okay, best case scenario, it's in your system for 2 to 12 hours a day. What do we want to do with the rest of the day? What do we want to do with the days you don't have it? So like, I feel like these tools matter whether or not you choose to use medication as one tool, but it's how can we work with your brain and your life to make the less interesting parts potentially more interesting?
Yeah.
How can we find new ways to do things or new ways to structure them or strategies to get through those parts of life that are maybe less interesting? Like I know for me, sometimes school was interesting, but getting an education was a challenge as well. And I have no regrets from doing it. But looking back with that ADHD, I had to find so many workarounds to the classes that just felt painful mentally.
What are some tangible examples of these workarounds? Because I think that's what you got to do. You got to trick your brain a little bit.
So I think a lot of it is around reducing that internal resistance. So one of the first things I'll say to my clients that I've done with myself so many times is I started to just recognize this internal resistance. And it's like we all have a child in us with ADHD that is very rebellious. So I could actually feel myself with school assignments or household things that I didn't like. It's like almost I felt this pressure and anger rising up in me that felt, for so long, it felt bad. So that's when I would just walk away. I wouldn't do it, right? And it would create problems for me by ignoring it. And so over time, I just started to recognize that and say, okay, well, how can I work with this? And so one of the simplest workarounds is just to reduce the overwhelm by setting a very specific time limit. So for any kind of project that feels impossible, where we're procrastinating and we don't want to start it, putting tangible length of time, 10 to 20 minutes is a really good starting place. So actually setting a timer and often using a auditory cue. There's a whole method called the Pomodoro method that can be really helpful, but they use this really quiet ticking. It sounds like a kitchen timer where it's this little tiny ticking. So you just know that it's on and you can set it really quietly, but it serves as a cue and a reminder to say, okay, this is the time to be focusing. And when that resistance comes up, we can just say to ourselves, okay, well, I just only have to do this for 20 minutes and then I can stop. It could be 10 minutes or even 5 for a task that really feels unpleasant. But when faced with, let's say, a school project, okay, 20 minutes, I'm not going to do a whole project, but I can read the instructions. And a lot of times when we just engage with something and we get started, it will reduce that internal feeling of resistance and overwhelm and upset. And then we are able to break it down and actually start to work through it.
And I bet we're also able to just kind of keep going once we're in that flow. It's just kind of tricking yourself to get in there.
Exactly.
Because I can think about if I were to do that with folding laundry, or for example, the bane of my existence. I can imagine myself setting that timer, but then once I get into it, I'm like, oh, this is actually kind of therapeutic. I'm actually feeling sort of good in my brain because I'm accomplishing something difficult. And it's also this idle task that is kind of helping to regulate my nervous system. It's doing something with my hands. It's doing something my ancestors did. It's an important thing. And then I feel more connected to myself and I want to continue.
Yeah.
And it's just so interesting when you mentioned people who are good or like okay with doing boring tasks versus ADHD folks, I kind of just started to think about the people in my life that are okay with the boring tasks, going slow, the simple moments, being still, not needing the TV all the time, just appreciating things around me. And those are people who are really present and who, for whatever reason, have very regulated nervous systems. And I'm thinking of one person as an example. And I almost feel like she has sort of been unspoiled by the excesses of modern life. And that has been her saving grace. And I wonder like how much of this is our brains almost being spoiled by that excess and us needing to learn how to slow down and come back to like the true nature of life.
I think that's really perfectly said. That I think with ADHD, a lot of times we have become comforted by this feeling of excess, of this feeling of, while we talk about dopamine, a lot of times those of us with ADHD also really thrive on stress hormones. Like they feel good to us. And so we are so used to this like going. Like it's like really, it's like just like a little too fast. And it feels good because it can be a state where we are productive and we are social and we are, just there's a lot going on. And that chaos can feel like busyness. It can feel like productivity and it can feel pleasurable. And I think that so much of our work in the flip side of there are good qualities to that state.
Yeah.
But the flip side is that we're usually not present and we're often overstimulated and often struggling with sleep or stress or, there's often a price to pay when we are moving too fast. And so learning to slow down and tolerate quiet and tolerate space in our schedule and tolerate just actually being bored because we do have that tendency to be allergic to boredom.
I feel like I started to really sort of heal from the chokehold that this picture of ADHD had on me when I really kind of spiritually asked myself, like, how much is enough? And I also had to ask myself, this version of me that is the hyperstimulated, hyperproductive upswing version that I think is my best self, because it's when I'm being most productive, is that actually my best self? Is that actually my truest self and my essence and who I really am and who I want to be in this world? Or is that a part of me, a version of me that is deriving worth because they are achieving things that are in line with the values of the very hyper-capitalistic, hyper-productive, sort of like masculine right-brained system that we're living in the West? And like, is that where my values lie as a human? And once I started to meet in little doses the true version of me, the true essence of who I am, the person who's like slowing down. Even now as I'm speaking a lot slower than I was in the beginning of the episode. This feels more like me. That person is more thoughtful, is okay with the little things, appreciates nature for what it is, not what it can do for me. I almost feel like there is a spiritual aspect of this connection to ADHD and this hyperconsumption world.
That distinction, I think, is really key because it's not part of the diagnostic criteria, but one of the really, really common traits of people with ADHD is this feeling of it's never enough. Like when we do accomplish something, we don't tend to have a very strong feeling of celebration. Mm-hmm. It's just like on to the next. And so there can be this very like fast internal pace and honestly, a low self-esteem that can come with ADHD. And so I think a lot of times when we do that spiritual work to really get in touch with our own self-worth, our own worthiness, that we are worthy simply by being the person that we are versus what we do, what we accomplish, checking off that list. I think that's often where we're able to step out of that place of overconsumption and too much and just this like kind of like constant chaos and actually have tolerance to be able to slow down.
Yeah, it's really building that nervous system capacity. It's like, and it's It's funny, everything that I talk about on the show, as far as I'm like, this is going to be a science episode, it always then comes back to like mirroring it to the spiritual, to our values, to this, system of excess that we're into, coming back into right relationship with the nature of life and the world around us and what really matters and slowness and just each other. And yeah, that really resonates with me. And thank you for sharing that. I want to talk a little bit about, you had mentioned that stress hormones feel really good to those of us with ADHD. And I certainly see that in myself of when I'm wanting to be in that revved, hyper-productive mode, that mode where I'm not super proud of myself, I am looking for things that stimulate cortisol, that stimulate dopamine. And in my past, when it was a little bit more maladaptive and when I was even deeper in the trenches, I think sometimes I would create conflict, create obstacles, create fights with my partner to get some of that. Could this be a thing that's happening to people?
That can be part of the traits that go along more with the sometimes impulsivity or even just a feeling of not feeling settled when things are peaceful and happy in our lives. That a lot of us, especially because there is a correlation between ADHD and having some degree of childhood trauma, that a lot of times, and I think the overlap there is hard to piece apart of like, what's ADHD? And then just what is a dysregulated nervous system from childhood experiences. But definitely there can be a trait where we are seeking adrenaline, and maybe that can look like causing problems mentally for ourselves, like you said, like starting a fight or just like creating drama in our lives.
Yeah, kind of like self-sabotage. And I definitely used to have a lot more shame around that until I understood that it was kind of like this neurochemical thing that was happening. And it was just sometimes the only way that I would function if I had that, like the neurochemicals that came from that sabotage or those obstacles. So I just had to learn how to have compassion for myself and keep asking why and going deeper and deeper. And as I hear you speak, the why, the deeper and deeper really is like that nervous system regulation and that healing of kind of like the mindset of the West. I don't know why it always comes back to that in podcasts for me. I feel like we really have lost the plot a bit. And there's ADHD is one of these like more modern chronic illnesses that are sprouting up like in connection with what's happening to our brains. So with that, I want to ask you, could ADHD theoretically perhaps be an adaptation to a hyper stimulating world where our brains are like almost trying to evolve very quickly in these last like 2 generations or so to a world where so many things need our attention, where there's so much excess and distraction. And maybe that interest-based nervous system is our bodies trying to be like, let's help you wade through the chaos by helping you hone in on what feels good to you.
I would say 2 things to that. One is, separate from our modern world, there is a theory that ADHD is an adaptation. So if we think about us being hunters and gatherers, if you think about the traits of ADHD, they actually can make a lot of sense in that hunter-gatherer where we need some people who are full of energy and they are just not going to feel defeated by constantly looking for the next thing, where we could focus and be gathering and hunting. And maybe we're the people who stay up a little bit later because we want to keep the tribe safe. So there's a whole theory that these personality traits actually have adapted, and that in fact, it's living in the modern world that is a misadaptation. Because if you take those traits of just being so curious and so passionate and so energetic, and then you say, I want you to sit in school for 6 hours and read this thing, it just feels painful if that is your natural tendency. So when I think about adaptation, there is that theory. And when I read about that, it just made sense when I think about the people that I know with ADHD and even just my own experience of how easy life feels when I'm able to be engaged with the things that are most interesting to me.
Yeah.
And then there is this sort of more modern question of, for one, I think the modern world can make us look like we have ADHD. And then there's the question of, do we have it or not? Because of just the way that, talking about dopamine, like the way that blue light screens will take over our attention. And it's like we become hypnotized, and it can feel so, so hard to regulate this thing that is literally designed to take our attention and to keep us focused on it for as long as possible. And I know if you think about any time I'm engaging with a lot of screens, suddenly being outdoors or reading a book feels less interesting because it's like eating candy all day long and then being served chicken and broccoli. It's just not as interesting as eating that hyper palatable food. And so it's like we're living in a hyper palatable world right now.
It's so funny that you said hyper palatable food, because I think one of the ways that I started to regulate myself and, again, like get rid of this chokehold that ADHD had. I mean, I can't say get rid of ADHD, but get rid of the control it had was by actually artificially limiting my own excess in various ways. And I did this experiment. 2021 was like my year of becoming in deeper observation and relationship with my vices and my tendencies. And I've had like a history of like different substance overuse. Cannabis was a big one for me. And so in 2021, I quit cannabis in January, quit coffee in April, and then but I basically did a break from hyperpalatable foods for like a month or so, or 2 months, to reset my brain around September. And with each actual conscious, very difficult limiting of my excess, this like year of pain that I went through, I noticed that everything else in my life, eventually, once I got past the withdrawals, quote unquote, which is really just your brain chemicals normalizing, everything else in my life suddenly felt more pleasurable and felt sweeter and more special. And I could slow down and be with things and be with people in a different way. And I think that is actually such an important practice for the ADHD brain, to really be willing to artificially limit your excess in all of these different ways and look at where you might be overindulging. Because like Anna Lemke says, when you think about addiction, quote unquote, which could be addiction to our phones, which could be addiction to shopping or hyperpalatable foods, addiction is this narrowing of what brings us pleasure until it's just that thing and everything else around it is gray. And that so often feels like the interest-based nervous system of ADHD. And it almost mirrors this picture of addiction or this lived experience of addiction. So is there this connection there that you make as well between ADHD and addiction?
There's a huge overlap between ADHD and addiction. So people with ADHD untreated are going to be more prone to all types of addiction. Now, it doesn't go that direction for everybody, but we're in general going to be more prone to classic addiction. So even things like caffeine use disorders, like where we call like truly overusing caffeine, people with ADHD are going to be more prone to that with that sense of, well, 1 cup felt good, 2 will feel better. I'm just going to keep drinking coffee. And I almost feel like that part of us that isn't really in touch with time, it's almost like we forget that, it's actually not going to feel good. That 6th cup of coffee does not feel as good as the first one. And I also think there can be a tendency towards more gray area where, yes, there's the true addiction, but then there's also like gray area use. Like one of the things you were saying around limiting those more dopamine giving, hyperpalatable parts of life is they let us override our real energy. Because for a lot of people with ADHD, if we are going too fast, if we are doing too much, if we are running ourselves ragged, that thing to bring us down, alcohol, cannabis, that really will balance out. It will falsely balance our scale. And so it lets us push through and keep going in a way that's unsustainable because we're not actually in touch with our own energy. It's really the same with caffeine. It'll let us override our internal lack of energy so that we can push through. And so I think part of it, you so beautifully said, is around resetting our dopamine receptors so that we can get in touch with just like I call it like the clean dopamine, like the things in life that really feel good and they give us energy, like being in nature, having quality friendships, eating really delicious, but like healthy, nourishing food, things like that. And the combination of balancing that out, but then also getting in touch with our own energy and our own essence and our own abilities. So we're not just in this state of being completely out of balance, will help us just feel better. And I think that is a really key part of keeping ADHD symptoms more managed. Because a lot of times when our energy is just, the scale is tipped, the symptoms are just going to be more and more severe.
I think this is where so much of that compassion comes in. Because again, we're living in a system that, our time equals our money, and therefore, and because like money is often the most important thing, / a lot of people are in financial crisis and our economy is crazy, thus our worth becomes how we can use our time to provide for that. And it's this really interesting system of worth and productivity and this interesting value system that we're living in. So of course, if we were to live by our energy, which probably would not allow us to work the way that we're having to work, we would not be able to like function within that system. So of course, we're going to reach for things that are revving up our brains. And of course, we're going to shift into, I'm going to run on cortisol instead of clean energy, because it's kind of like you have to. And I noticed that when I talked about my caffeine journey, that was the most sensitive topic I ever talked about. With cannabis, people were like, oh my God, I love this. How did you get off? Like, tell me more. With hyperpalatable foods, they were like, this is so interesting. With caffeine, they were like,
they don't want to go there.
You're a monster. Delete your account. How dare you say that? Coffee has antioxidants. And I'm like, no, I hear you. I hear you. And I think it's like, of course, we have to kind of hold fast to that. I'm meant to take a stimulant every day. And I'm taking a freaking stimulant right now. I'm drinking coffee now. And I got back on the wagon because, I'm not perfect. But of course, we like want to reach for those things because it helps us function in this world. And then because of that, it kind of sends us on this spiral either way because it's introducing something that's pushing us. And it's hard. It's hard to function like that.
I would say, though, that it is possible to function in the world without necessarily pushing ourselves too hard.
Yeah.
It's like caffeine could be something that we use to push through, or it could be something that we use to enjoy. And maybe it just gives us that little bit more dopamine and we feel a little bit more balanced with it. Right? So there's a balance to it.
Yeah.
And I would just usually say, too, that a lot of people with ADHD push themselves unnecessarily hard. And so there is this almost overworking because it's like, it's just this trait that people tend to have. And so sometimes I would challenge that and just say, well, is it possible to function in your life, in your career, without overdoing it?
Yeah.
Like, is it possible to just do it? And for some people in certain careers, it's not possible. But for a lot of people, it is.
Yeah.
Like if they dial back 20%, nothing changes.
Dude, that's the realization of the century because the medicine of saying no, it's actually on us to do so, but we don't maybe rationally have an understanding of that it would be okay to, like you said, to pull back. We think we have to do everything. And I definitely recently had this experience where I started to say no to a few things because I had this guest, Sa DeSimone, on. I'll link his episode as well, and I'll link Anna Lemke's episode. But Sa talks about the importance of community and relationships and socializing and how that really is the most important thing. And he explains how we really trade our time for money and also for, that extra drunk vacation throughout the year or having like a slightly nicer car or, like getting our nails, hair, this, blah, blah, blah done every month. And he's like, think about if you just said no to a few of those things, took a few things off your plate and just like maybe made slightly less or like made some cuts that you could spend that time with people that would actually fill into your life. And those are the people who, when your mother dies, are going to show up to your funeral because you built those relationships. Like you have to really go zoom out big picture here. Like, what am I doing? And it's like this come to God moment. It's like a very spiritual thing. I think ADHD, like the experience of it, is almost like this way in to the soul, just like anything else, just like any other thing that comes into our lived experience.
Yeah. One of the first exercises I will often do with the ADHD person who is overwhelmed, overburdened, they feel like they barely have time to work with me because they just have too much going on, is we actually shine light on this autopilot of how we schedule ourselves, because what you just described is so common for people with ADHD, of just the schedule is packed and it's packed on autopilot. Nothing was really consciously put on there. I know for myself, I had an automatic yes for most things for most of my life. And it actually was an exercise that now I take people through when I work with them, of pausing when something comes our way and asking ourselves, do I want to do this? Do I have time to do this? Do I have capacity to do this? And because of that tendency towards not being very thoughtful with time, we'll also just pack our schedules in a way that we're rushing. We'll schedule calls back to back to back instead of giving ourselves the breaks for water and food and just to take a minute and go outside. And so I think one of the fastest and easiest ways that we can create more capacity for ourselves is just by turning off that autopilot and getting really conscious with how we're scheduling things and actually learning to say no, because it can feel scary. We're highly sensitive, so it feels weird to say no to people. But that is one of the simplest practices when people are really overwhelmed.
You said, do I want to do this? Do I have the capacity to do this? And
do I have time?
Do I have time to do this?
Yeah, because time and capacity are not the same thing.
No, you're right. Why?
Well, because I think sometimes there are things we might have time for, but that are energetically maybe bigger than something that we really have to give.
Yeah. How do you think someone can start to think about capacity? Because it's kind of a relatively new term-ish, at least in kind of like modern pop psychology. And I think I only just started to really understand what it was recently and be able to feel it in my body. Do I have capacity for that? I guess I think of it as, yeah, I could do that time-wise, but if I do it, will I give it my all? How would you gauge it?
I would think of it as, will I feel energized or depleted from saying yes to this? And the depletion part is really key, right? Like if something I might have time for that is going to drain me potentially, I would really think twice, unless there's a huge upside somehow from doing it.
Yeah, it's like, am I going to put my chest into this? Am I going to like get joy in return? And like, yeah, my cup can be also filled. When you understand that you don't have capacity for something, or when your clients understand that, how do you suggest they go about communicating that to others in their no?
I usually think less is more with our no's, and that we don't necessarily have to explain ourselves, and then just being kind and direct, like a thank you so much for thinking of me, but I can't take this on right now.
That's a really good one. I'm going to get that tattooed on my forehead.
Because when we start giving reasons, it just gives people the opportunity to push back on our boundary. So I just say no.
Yeah, that's my new vibe. There's just no justifications, and there's no like me explaining any decision that I do. It's just no. Yeah.
Unless it's something I truly want to do and can't. Like if my best friend invites me to do something amazing and I can't do it, then I'll usually give a justification because we're there in our like intimate relationship.
Yeah.
But in general, with most things, I don't give a reason.
I think that's such a good practice. And I think it's also really good practice on the flip side as a human who is trying to be in better right relationship with others in the world, to practice being really receptive and loving to other people's no's. I think that actually can make you more comfortable with your own, that when you receive a no from someone, you're like, absolutely, I love that. Great. Like, thanks for doing what you need to do and saying what you need to say. I think we all can be better stewards of relationship and boundaries, and that will give us a little bit more padding for this wild world.
And what a practice for everyone listening with ADHD tendencies, because a lot of times our boundaries and our no's are some of the like most permeable parts of ourselves, where we are struggling in so much of our lives and our relationships because we are not fully attuned to ourselves and saying yes and no to things. And so I think it's a beautiful practice to share for people.
I love that, not fully attuned to ourselves. Yeah. A lot of this puzzle of life is becoming better attuned to ourselves and to people around us. Even when you mention like the check-in of, do I have the time, the capacity for this? I just thought about that takes having a relationship with yourself.
Right.
And I think that the more I, am in this world and work with folks, the more I see that people aren't missing another supplement or another protocol or the steps of what to do. Most of us are missing the relationship with ourselves. That's really in this chronic, it doesn't go for everything, but in this chronic picture of like kind of lifestyle based, reactionary chronic illnesses to the world that we're living in. It's what it's going to take to get out of that, and to know what you need to get out of that is that really deep relationship with yourself and the time to even have that check-in and the willingness to try, even if it feels silly, to sit there with your hand on your heart and ask yourself questions.
At the core of ADHD and most chronic illnesses is a profound disconnection from ourselves. And it is a sense of disregarding and dissociating from our inner selves. And I think that so many people with really all chronic illness, like it goes so much deeper than just ADHD, but it's certainly part of ADHD, and that like slowly beginning to reattune to ourselves. And I know some people with ADHD would probably be listening and be like, well, the nature of ADHD means I am completely disconnected from myself. And I would just challenge that and say that that might be true right now, but it is always possible to reconnect.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, like, you're struggling because your body is not loving not having that relationship with you, and it wants to, and it's capable of it. And it's like, hey, I'm right here. So I think that there's always that doorway in. And I've been thinking so much these days about doors in, about ways in, because it's just going to be different for everybody. What resonates with one person isn't going to resonate with the next, and it's going to feel like a chore to someone else, and is not going to be fun and juicy and a cool way into them. Like, health doesn't have to be so serious all the time. And so I think when I look at this picture of becoming connected to yourself again as an avenue for healing, I think about ritual a lot, and I think about making each moment special in a spiritual way, in like I'm going to choose to believe in magic kind of way. And even before I came here, I was posted a story about this, that I've started to, in the shower before podcast recordings, I've started to like let the water hit me and do this ritual of thanking my ancestors, connecting with them, asking them to connect with the ancestors of my podcast guest, and to conspire together to help us make the best possible episode for the people listening, for the highest good of all parties involved. And just by like taking that moment to slow down and like infuse a little bit of prayer and ritual into my day or whatever it is, I find that I come back to myself a little bit more each time. And I think our ancestors did that a lot. They did that with cleaning rituals. I look at my Italian like folk medicine side. Every Sunday, you're supposed to do this cleaning ritual and open all the windows. Cultures burn different plants as rituals. They did a summer solstice thing. Like, there's so many rituals that we've just forgotten. And maybe we need to believe in magic a little bit more.
I think that is such a beautiful practice as far as how we can reconnect with ourselves. And honestly, is a perfect connection to the ADHD person. Because I usually think when ADHD is at its worst, we are completely disconnected from routine and ritual. And there tends to be a sense of chaos, and that each day is different. And so even the most basic things of what time do we go to bed? What time do we get up? When do we feed ourselves? What do we feed ourselves? Those things can be some of the hardest for people with ADHD. And so I often think that the reconnecting with routine and reconnecting with it as ritual is one of the most beautiful ways we can bring balance and reconnect with ourselves, because these rituals can be acts of loving ourselves. I mean, sleep and nourishing your body can be the most loving things you ever do, like far more than any like big, fantastic ritual. Like, those are the things we do every day that can be so powerful and profound for us. And one of the rituals that I would actually recommend for anyone, I guess there's really two for people with ADHD. One is, I think, being in nature can be really powerful because it reconnects us with that sense of awe. And so often with ADHD, we are trapped in our mental energy. And so it can just bring us down into our bodies and reconnect us with the outside world. Scientific studies also show that it'll lower our cortisol levels. So it can definitely help us with that stress response. But the other thing I would say is mindfulness. And I know that this gets thrown around a lot, so I want to say it really carefully, but because the reason that mindfulness can be powerful is that so often, most of us, but especially those of us with ADHD, we are living, breathing, and acting based 100% on the little voice in our head that just is constantly chattering away, telling us what to do. And when we begin in any way to connect with mindfulness and we sit and we just observe our thoughts, we become attuned to this observer of who is actually talking, who is actually telling me that I would rather sleep with clothes on my bed than fold my laundry. And by being in touch with that observer, we get to choose.
Yeah.
And I say this to myself and to my clients, you always get to choose. Like, you don't have to do anything in your life. You don't have to fold your laundry. You don't have to go to work, and you get to accept the consequences. Like, you don't have to do anything. And I think our power in our choice gets so much more profound when we are connected to that inner observer, because that is so much closer to our higher self than just the little chattering voice that's just saying a million things all day long. That's not always in our highest good. It tends to be more in favor of what feels really good right now.
Yeah.
And the more that we can strengthen that voice of our real, true inner self, I think the more we can slowly start to make these changes, because then we're not just white knuckling it and relying on discipline.
So beautiful. This is the work. This is it. And I hope that those of you listening right now are like getting chills just hearing that and feeling that like, ooh, this is an answer. Because it's not like, so often we look for the answers for our health in things that we can buy and in things outside of ourselves. And obviously tools are helpful and can play their role. But even yesterday, the podcast I was recording, she was talking about the observer. And I was like, your observer sounds like your capital S self in parts work, your highest self, what I call your inner mother. And I can definitely say in my experience that the difference between when I would say I was really mentally unhealthy and me now, where I think I'm actually like a much better person, is that I still have the thoughts that I once had. That's not going to stop, which I guess are coming from the ego, right? Or the firefighter, or the part of us that, is stressed and wants to protect us and wants to create separation between other people and, wants to make a snap judgment about somebody else because it would feel a lot safer to feel separate from that person than to see that you're just like them, as we all are just like each other. And so when I hear myself make that snap judgment about somebody and hear myself, right? Like somehow, somewhere along the way, I cultivated a self-awareness, a relationship with that observer. And I have those thoughts all the time. I'm human, but I now instantly respond from the observer of like, why would you say that? Stop. Like, that's not a productive thought. Actually, you're just like that. Like, I check myself from that place of metacognition, and I don't know how you get there to cultivate that, but somehow I guess I did. So how can people start to cultivate that?
Practice. I mean, meditation is an ancient practice, and I think there's so many different ways that we can do that. But even just 5 or 10 minutes a day can be really profound. And there actually are studies looking at ADHD and severity of symptoms, and that mindfulness meditation can reduce symptom severity. And so it's definitely something that while I understand is very hard with ADHD, it can be very powerful. But also, like you were just saying, it's noticing. I mean, even I feel like the turning point for me was just recognizing that inner self. And that I remember there was one point, I think I was eating ice cream, and I remember I was like, this was so good. Let's get like a second bowl. And I remember that inner observer voice just said, it's never 2 bowls, 3 bowls, 4 bowls. It's still going to taste good. So let's just call it.
Was that the first time you heard that?
That was the first time I think I really started developing the self-parenting. And I actually love what you said, because I think that so much of working with ourselves as people who are neurodivergent really comes from self-parenting, because there is that the voices that are gravitating towards just more and pleasure and stress don't necessarily go away. But I think that part of like really being mentally healthy and thriving is just the self-parenting of course, watching another episode of a great TV show is going to feel good, but it would feel even better if I got 8 hours of sleep.
How do you think you got to the point where all of a sudden you heard that voice? Because I know a lot of people are listening, like, I've never felt that. Like, I feel out of control in my mind. I don't have some like higher consciousness that's talking to me.
Sometimes I think just having someone else describe the experience can help us begin to be in touch with that, because you don't have to go to a meditation retreat to just sit for a moment and notice the voice in your head and notice that it's actually not you. Like, who is that talking?
Are there other forms of meditation that still qualify as that aren't necessarily sitting there meditating? Because personally, I've never used meditation in this journey, but I have, for example, one time I took a few weeks off work for the first time. Again, that's slowing down, saying no. Disconnected for the first time since starting my business. And I just stayed home. I was like, I'm actually not going to try to escape my life. I'm going to take time off in my life and see how my life feels.
Yeah.
And I just sat there and was like, yeah, my house is a mess. And I made it like my project the next week or two to just realize that right now I have all the time in the world. I have more than enough time. Again, it's never enough. I have more than enough time. I'm going to, in a non-rushed way, methodically like dance with this experience of organizing my house, not rush do it in an ADHD hyperfixation way, but like really feel into the joys of the experience that I can do this task with as much time as I need, so I can make it intimate and special. And as I room by room purged my house and got organizers and found a place for things and made systems, as I was doing those idle tasks and being a slow human, all of a sudden I heard things pop into my mind. I heard, sometimes when you like ask Nick to do XYZ for you, it's not really fair to him. And I was like, whoa, what's that? Ow. And I just started to like hear this consciousness bubble up. And I just had never maybe given myself the space before to interface with that consciousness. And I just started to have these insights that were coming from that voice. And I guess maybe that's when the voice first came. And maybe that's a recommendation that people can do a cleaning meditation. The next time you take, PTO, maybe you're not going on a vacation that's even more hyperstimulating. Maybe you're figuring out how you can like create magic in your own world and create ritual in your home and enjoy the home you've created. I don't know.
Anything where you are giving yourself space is going to give yourself the opportunity to connect with your inner self, your inner voice. So I think it could be so many different things. I know for me, I like to sit and watch the sunrise most mornings, and I won't take my phone, and just sitting quietly doing something in nature. It could be starting with a shower or bath, because maybe that's a place you just reduce the stimulation. Like maybe you don't put on music or a podcast, but just enjoy that. And just a lot of people say they have their best insights in the shower.
Your phone is nowhere to be found unless you're like me and bring it in there.
Right? So maybe it's just taking a walk and leaving your phone in your bag or leaving it at home, going hiking.
Yeah.
It could be just anything where we give ourselves a little bit of space, like a little bit of space to be bored, a little bit of space to get, like you were saying, like cleaning as a meditation where I'm not rushing. Because I think even the practice of meditation is not going to be beneficial if it's just one of 1,000 things we're trying to do in a day. And we are rushing through it because I'm doing meditation because it's the thing that's going to make me healthy. Like, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
Just find things in your day-to-day life where you can be slower and spacious and actually have the possibility to be with your own thoughts.
I have two mantras that really help me. One is I have more than enough time. And the other mantra that really helps me is I'm like that too. When I'm doing a little snap judgment, Judge Judy moment, I'm like, oh, I'm mad at that person for cutting me off. I'm like that too. I've cut off someone before. You know, it's like so much of it is like reining in the ego a little bit and like getting in touch with that higher self. And the spaciousness gives us the chance to do that. And the I have enough time gives us the chance to do that. And that's, I guess, again, going back to the whole like picture of the West, that's what's missing is space.
Yeah.
Time.
Space, time, boredom, nature.
Yeah. Are there any other like tangible ways or practices that you give people to artificially limit that excess and like bring that boredom in?
So as far as supporting ADHD symptoms, there definitely is evidence for making dietary changes. Most research is going to focus on doing elimination diets. And the plus side of that is I think that they are almost always eliminating most processed and hyperpalatable foods simply because if we're taking a break from the most common allergens, it's really hard to eat most hyperpalatable foods. And sugar is often considered one of the things that we need to limit in an elimination diet. And so that is definitely one tool that I think is both resetting our dopamine circuits, it's resetting our taste buds. And there is evidence that by eliminating things we're sensitive to, like it's not 100% clear, is it on an inflammatory pathway? Is it on the histamine pathway? But for a lot of people with ADHD, they will do much better and have improved symptoms when we find the right diet for them.
Does that look different for everybody or are there some general guidelines?
It is individual in the sense that there isn't just like one size fits all. It will be different, but usually I will have people eliminate sugar, dairy, gluten, corn, and then sometimes like those higher histamine offenders like tomatoes and avocado and strawberries and things like that. Certainly alcohol.
Yeah.
Corn, soy.
Why dairy, corn, and soy?
Just that certain people are sensitive to them.
You just observe clinically and others have observed.
It's really in the research around the elimination diets. I think it's more the casein in them. Corn is just a common allergen. With soy, I think it's that it's a common allergen. It's usually highly processed and it can be very high in oxalates. Yeah. So for some people, they're sensitive to that part of it.
So with the whole histamine thing, because our listeners are a big fan of the histamine episode that we did, is it kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg? Is it sort of going back to the nervous system?
It's definitely a chicken or egg situation. And it looks like histamine might be the egg in the sense that predisposition to histamine. So children who have allergies, asthma, and eczema are 30 to 50% more likely to go on to be diagnosed with ADHD. So there's a huge overlap. It's not 100% of people, but for a certain subset of ADHD, there's this really strong immune and histamine pathway. And then it seems like it just continues in adulthood, and it's not totally clear why. Part of it is how histamine impacts our other neurotransmitters. There's whole theories that it may be the inflammation from the histamine. It could impact the blood-brain barrier. Like we don't totally know why. And there's actually quite a few really interesting studies like exploring this role of histamine in ADHD. But it's definitely one of the things that when I'm working with somebody, it's one of those stones that we always want to uncover of like, are they a histamine sensitive person? And if yes, not like really getting those mast cells in balance and reducing inflammation and reducing histamine can make a difference.
Could it be though that those kids who have the atopic allergic conditions, which like you said are allergies, eczema, and asthma, so this is like these three conditions that are often prevalent in childhood and can come together or not, that are part of this allergic picture where children have immune system overactivation from a young age. And that is very aligned with this picture of MCAS and histamine issues that Michelle and I had nailed down a bit. Could it be that those children, though, are just essentially the children that have more nervous system dysfunction from a young age, and that's driving the immune system overactivation?
Totally could be.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think we can never boil it down to just one variable, right? Like it's not that simple. So I definitely think that the because those children with that immune predisposition, they're going to be so much more sensitive with their nervous systems to this like compounding life experience that ends up as MCAS at some point. So yes, and there's definitely an overlap between ADHD and MCAS.
I'm sure like childhood trauma also playing a role. All the
Of course.
things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Got you. So basically in this picture of ADHD, alongside all the things that we're saying, the ways into the slowness, the artificially limiting excess, the mindfulness, the meditations, the creating space in your life, the saying no, we also want to maybe dive in a bit to see if we're part of that histamine picture, and then take steps to manage our mast cell overactivation and stabilize our immune response, which really for me at the end of the day just goes back to saying no and doing all the other things that we mentioned. But yeah, it's just worth it to know and to be able to use histamine reducing tools as part of your ADHD toolbox if the histamine is a piece for you.
Yeah, there is the psychological part of working with ADHD, which is so much of what we talked about around like self-connection and boundaries and how do we reduce resistance to things that feel really hard. And then there's all the things we can do with our physical health, which are like the histamine, the gut health, the inflammation, our hormones, like all of that.
I'm so glad you brought it there because that's my last two sections that we got to dive into, emotional supporting and physical supporting. When it comes to physically supporting those with ADHD, you mentioned medication earlier. Can you kind of just quickly outline the differences between conventional treatments and more naturopathic approaches, a bit of a pros and cons for each, and just kind of list out some things people can do?
In the conventional system, treatment of ADHD is really going to focus on medication and behavioral support. And so medication is going to actually be helpful in reducing symptoms for 70 to 80% of people. It's not a cure. It works when it's in your system. It'll be there for 2 to 12 hours, kind of depending on the person. And it can have side effects. The number one reason that people will discontinue medication is because it's not as effective as they hoped, or because it has undesirable side effects. So like difficulty sleeping, anxiety, sweating, cardiac arrhythmia, all stuff like that. In general, it's well tolerated and safe. And so if it's working for somebody, fantastic. There's lots of behavioral things that can be done. And then from the naturopathic perspective, it's really looking at the body as a whole. And so really looking at what could possibly be out of balance here. I want to know head to toe what's going on with someone, because it's very rare that I see someone with classic ADHD where they do not also have a chronic illness, because what we see is ADHD is more common in almost every single chronic illness, from migraines to mast cell activation to IBS to allergies to endometriosis to PMDD to anxiety and depression. And so because ADHD is so rarely existing in this vacuum, that if we can support the whole body and look at where these imbalances are, that is where I think we can often support people with ADHD the most. And that by supporting the physical health, we will see downstream benefits in our mental health and executive functioning. And so some of the things that we can do would be diet first and foremost. I think that the elimination diet is usually where I start with someone. It's really helpful to do that under the guidance of a medical practitioner, just because they can be hard.
Yeah.
Sleep is one of the most important things. Up to 75% of people with ADHD also have a sleep disorder. Specifically, we are very prone to the delayed circadian rhythms. And so we are night owls. We are very sensitive to blue light. And so we're also prone, though, to every single type of sleep disorder. And so by working with sleep, we can very much help ADHD symptoms. And even just looking at that rhythm of sleeping and wakefulness, so often if we have a sleep disorder, it also means that our cortisol is often out of balance, because if we're delayed and we're not tired until 2 a.m., but we have to get up at 7 or 8, those first few hours of the day when we should have high cortisol, we're going to have very low cortisol. And so it's going to make all of our ADHD symptoms so much worse. So we're not only sleep deprived, but we're not hitting our wakefulness until much later in the day. And so those first few hours of the day, it often feels like we're just like walking through mud trying to get things done. And so really optimizing sleep and circadian rhythm can be game changers in helping people focus in the full hours that they're awake each day.
Can you give us an idea of some of the tools in the toolbox for getting that earlier sleep?
So the biggest things are going to be controlling our nighttime light environment. And so this is really where we've got to get rid of the blue light at night and wearing blue blockers, getting sunshine early in the day. And for people with I had a true circadian rhythm sleep disorder, working with a sleep specialist, or this is a protocol I'll take people through. There are specific protocols where we just slowly bring your bedtime and wake time earlier. And so there's definitely things we can do. And, I would just say controlling your light environment at night and getting morning light are amazing places to start. And if that doesn't solve it, work with someone, because there's definitely ways people with ADHD may be more prone to being a little later in our schedules. But I think it should be more 10 or 11, not 3 or 4 in the morning.
Yeah.
Usually that means we're doing too much with our screens and our light environment.
I could do that. I could do 10 or 11. And then, how does liver health impact ADHD symptoms, and should we be supporting that?
So my understanding in Chinese medicine, which I'm not an acupuncturist, but my understanding in Chinese medicine is that often the liver is very implicated when we're looking at ADHD and focus issues. And that supporting the liver can generally be helpful from my perspective as a naturopathic doctor, because it's going to... I'm just trying to think of how to say this. Supporting our liver will generally help with our gut health.
Yeah.
It's going to help with any dysbiosis. It's going to impact how we process all of our hormones. It's going to impact how we process environmental toxins. And there are correlations between nearly all of our environmental toxins and ADHD. So I often have to wonder, is there a potentially upstream genetic issue or liver issue where maybe we are not breaking down things that everyone else should be in our environment as well, and that there could be some liver stagnation. Yeah, I don't know, but that's something I wonder about.
I studied a bit of Chinese medicine as part of my herb school training, as well as did some continuing education in classical Chinese medicine. And the liver is actually, interestingly, a site for circadian regulation in Chinese medicine. So that actually makes a lot of sense too. That's so fascinating. And obviously it's going to help to eliminate histamine and other things.
Right.
Maybe factoring in.
Histamine, inflammation, it's all connected.
Liver health is my Staples easy button. It's something's wrong. Liver, up my liver support. And it usually helps 9 out of 10 times. Okay. So there's so many other things I want to ask you about the emotional support and the physical support. So maybe you and I could do a joint blog post, just outlining some general things helpful foods because they contain certain minerals, yada, yada, even more info about the medication and kind of nutrients to be mindful of when you're on an ADHD medication that might be depleted.
Very much so.
So
yes,
we'll
definitely make a follow-up so that people can have resources.
Yeah, absolutely.
And feel like they have some tangible tools.
I love that. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Where can we find more of your work?
So I can be found across all platforms at Dr. Laura Gouge. That's my website, Instagram, TikTok. I'm probably most active on Instagram. So if you want to message me, I do all my own social media and answer DMs. So stay in touch there.
That's amazing. And you also share a lot about MCAS and histamine and PMDD and all these other things that can come along with ADHD on your Instagram. So I highly recommend that people follow you there.
Thank you. Yeah, I talk about everything to do with ADHD and then all of the ways that chronic illness can play a role in our mental health.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wasn't that great?